Hi, this is Bobby Perryman from the Vespasian Warner Public Library District, and I'm here with another tale from the archive where we share stories from DeWitt County history. In October of 2025, the library hosted a walking tour called the Murder, Mystery, and Mayhem Tour that stopped in 10 different sites in Clinton to talk about nefarious, infamous, or shady things that had happened at those sites. We are now going to be producing this video series talking about those instances. Just a quick note, this is currently February of 2026 and the library is undergoing a massive and very loud HVAC renovation project, so we are currently in my home with my cats. Say hello to Constance. They will probably be in and out of the video. So our first stop on the Murder, Mystery, and Mayhem tour is the original DeWitt County Jail that was constructed in 1854 and demolished in the 1990s. The jail stood roughly where the Clinton Eagles building is now, facing on North Monroe Street near East Washington Street and North Center Street. Many prisoners were held in the jail over the years. At this point in time, the jail and the courthouse were separate buildings, but by far the most infamous person to ever be held in the jail was a man by the name of Patsy DeWitt, and this is his story. And DeWitt's story actually starts north of here in Bloomington on the night of August 14th, 1879. A Bloomington citizen by the name of Aaron Goodfellow was walking home after visiting with friends about 9 o'clock at night and walking to his house when he was jumped by two would-be muggers who demanded money. At first, Mr. Goodfellow thought that it was some kind of a practical joke until one of the muggers pulled out a gun and shot him in the jaw. Mr. Goodfellow was a large and fairly strong man, so he fought back and was actually gaining ground on the two muggers when the other one shot him in the inner thigh, and this made him collapse to the ground. And the two muggers ran off without having gained a single cent. The shots and yelling had brought over many passers-by, and they carried Mr. Goodfellow from where he fell in the street to his home. Mr. Goodfellow did live the entire night and was coherent enough that he was able to describe his two assailants to the Bloomington police. Unfortunately, he did die the next morning from blood loss from his thigh wound. Numerous witnesses placed two petty criminals near the area where Mr. Goodfellow was attacked. The men were named Patsy DeWitt and Harry Williams. And a handkerchief found on the ground near Goodfellow was said by those witnesses to belong to Patsy DeWitt. Both men also fit the description that Goodfellow had given, but only DeWitt was arrested for the murder because he fit the description of the man who actually shot in the thigh, and that was the killing shot. So who was Patsy DeWitt? Well, Patrick, or Patsy DeWitt, and his family immigrated to the United States when he was a small child from Ireland. We don't know exactly what his age was. At the time of his trial in 1881, he claimed to be 25 years old, though his mother, who had pretty much disowned him, said he was over 30. He had his first brush with the law when he was 8 years old, and it never stopped. Mostly theft and fraud and those sorts of crimes, but nothing really violent. By the time he was in Bloomington in 1879, he had moved around a great deal and already had served prison time in 3 different states. Aaron Goodfellow, by contrast, was a very well-regarded citizen in Bloomington, and because the outcry over his death was so strong, DeWitt's attorneys knew that he would never get a fair trial in McLean County, so a change of venue was granted and he was moved down here to DeWitt County and housed in the DeWitt County Jail. At this point in American history, the local sheriff and his family would actually live in the jail, and in 1881 that was Sheriff Weedman and his wife. And Mrs. Weedman was in charge of taking care of the prisoners, cooking their meals, doing their laundry, and that sort of thing. And from his arrest in 1879 until the day of his death in 1881, DeWitt lived in that jail, so 3 years. DeWitt was, by all accounts, an incredibly charming man. He entertained his guards with Irish jigs and funny songs and stories, and he charmed Mrs. Weedman so much that she became quite fond of him. And she would not only kept him well fed, but when he requested, she would sneak him in whiskey and cigars, much to her husband's chagrin. Now, DeWitt maintained his innocence the entire 3 years he was here and claimed that he was actually on a train to Alton on the night of the murder. However, all of the witnesses placed him in the vicinity when Goodfellow was attacked. The first trial occurred in January of 1881, but there was a technicality that made it a mistrial. So DeWitt was granted a second trial in 1882, still here in DeWitt County. By this time, 2 of the witnesses against DeWitt had died and 1 had just disappeared, but the prosecution still felt they had a very strong case. And DeWitt maintained his innocence, claiming he had been a thief all his life but never a murderer. The jury convicted DeWitt in March of 1882. It took 3 votes of the jury to decide on execution. Now, the DeWitt County authorities did not want to make a huge spectacle out of DeWitt's execution, so rather than a public hanging or gallows outside, they constructed a gallows inside the jail in what was called the poor wing, or the pauper wing, or debtor wing. They actually had to pull up some of the floorboards so the condemned man would fall down into the basement, with the idea that he would fall quickly enough to break his neck and have a quick death. Even though he was kept within the jail, he became something of a minor celebrity, and many people in Clinton and surrounding areas flocked to the jail in the days leading up to the execution to see the prisoner. DeWitt was executed at 11 a.m. on May 12, 1882. It was an extremely rainy day, and there were roughly 175 people crammed into the jail to witness the hanging. The Clinton Register, a local paper, reported, "As he ascended the scaffold and stepped upon the trapdoor, his face showed no emotion, while the crowd was all expectation and were waiting with bated breath to see what each moment would bring forth. And strong men were each the victim with startled, wild expressions and twitching of the mouth. Patsy was perfectly cool and collected." DeWitt had a gallows speech prepared, so when he mounted the scaffold, he said, "Gentlemen, all I have got to say is that I am innocent of the murder of Aaron Goodfellow and that I protest. If anyone has done me a wrong, I freely forgive them, and I forgive all who have ever done me a wrong. I am ready to die and am prepared for the other world and home. God will have mercy on me. I forgive everybody and intend to die like a man. I could give some very valuable information concerning Williams, but I suppose it would hardly be worthwhile now, so I'll not say anything about that. But I know that I could have satisfied the people of Bloomington and Clinton of my innocence. I could have given the whereabouts of Williams, the other mugger, and had him arrested and brought to Bloomington in 48 hours after my arrest or any time since then. But I have said nothing, and now it is too late. I have been treated well since I have been in this jail, and I thank Mr. Weedman and Mrs. Weedman and all the rest of them who are so kind to me. I protest my innocence. I am ready to die. Father Weldon, the local Catholic priest, offer up a prayer for me." Father Weldon urged DeWitt to think of Jesus at the end and offered a prayer for his soul. However, these would not be Patsy DeWitt's last words. His last words were actually, as Sheriff Weedman was getting ready to put the hood over his face, "Stop, I need to spit out this straw of tobacco." And those would be the last things Patsy DeWitt would say. After Sheriff Weedman pulled the lever for the trapdoor, DeWitt fell, but his neck did not break, and it took him about 10 minutes to strangle to death. His body was placed on display in the courthouse up on the square. This would have been the 3rd courthouse. And his family declined having the body sent to them, so he was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. On the day of his execution, a local grocer named Drew Enham ran an ad for his dry goods store that declared, "Patsy is hanged, but the doom of DeWitt is not more certain than the fear of high prices in Clinton," proving that no matter what the time period, there are people that will capitalize on anything. Patsy DeWitt remains the only person ever subjected to the death penalty in DeWitt County history. Now, I am a local. I grew up here, and so I always heard legends of Patsy DeWitt. And one of the legends that might have credence states that when Harry Williams was on his deathbed, he confessed to actually being the one to murder Aaron Goodfellow, to make the shot into the thigh, and not Patsy DeWitt. I don't know whether or not that's true, but the other half of the rumor that I'm fairly certain is not true was that when this came back to DeWitt County, the authorities in the county were so horrified that they had hanged an innocent man that they vowed to never have an execution in DeWitt County again. True or not, that is the legend. So the county jail, as I said earlier, was built in 1854, but even by the 1880s it was in rough shape. In fact, it was in such dire condition that beginning of the 20th century, the newspapers constantly cried out for it to be torn down and replaced. It was in such bad condition that 11 prisoners managed to just knock a hole in the wall and walk right out of it. But it remained the county jail until the 1980s when the new county complex was constructed on Washington Street. And as I said, it sat abandoned. It was at least 1 year, the haunted house before it was finally torn down. So thank you for joining me for this tale from the archive, and I hope to see you soon.